Karen thought she could bully her neighbor into taking down his American flag. But she had no idea the fury she was about to unleash. This is the story of one man's fight for his freedom, and the relentless Karen who tried to take it away. Mike had proudly displayed his American flag outside his home for over a decade. The bright stars and stripes were a daily reminder of the country he loved and the sacrifices so many had made to protect its values of liberty and justice for all. So when his neighbor Karen knocked on his door one sunny afternoon, the last thing he expected was for her to demand that he take it down. "Your flag is an eyesore, and it's affecting the property values in our neighborhood," Karen sneered, her thin lips curled in disgust. "I want you to remove it immediately." Mike stared at her in stunned silence. "This is my home, Karen. The flag stays." "Don't be ridiculous," she scoffed. "As the HOA president, I'm giving you 48 hours to take it down or face the consequences." Mike's jaw tightened. The flag is not coming down. End of discussion. Karen's eyes narrowed to slits. "Have it your way." She turned on her heel and stormed off, muttering under her breath. Over the next 2 days, Mike watched warily as Karen began making calls and sending furious emails to the other homeowners. Suddenly, notices started appearing on everyone's doors. The HOA was levying fines of $500 per day until Mike's flag was removed. Outraged, Mike called an emergency neighborhood meeting. As his neighbors gathered in the community center, the tension in the room was palpable. "This is an outrageous abuse of power," Mike thundered. "Karen is trying to strong-arm me into taking down my American flag. But I won't stand for it, and neither should you." The crowd erupted in angry shouts and murmurs of agreement. Karen sat in the back, her arms crossed defiantly. "We have to fight this," one neighbor yelled. "She can't just fine us for exercising our rights," another added. Mike raised his hand, silencing the room. "I've already contacted a lawyer. We're going to take this all the way to federal court if we have to. Karen is not going to win this one." As the meeting broke up, Mike caught Karen's eye. She glared at him, her face flushed with rage. But behind the anger, he saw a flicker of fear. She knew she had gone too far this time. Mike turned away, feeling a surge of determination. This was about more than just his flag. It was about standing up to bullies and defending the principles that made America great. He was ready for the fight of his life. The next morning, Mike woke up to find a bright orange sticker slapped on his front door. A notice of the first $500 fine from the HOA. Furious, he called his lawyer, Jessica, who promised to file an injunction immediately. "This is a clear violation of your First Amendment rights," Jessica assured him. "We'll get this resolved in court as soon as possible." True to her word, Jessica was in front of a federal judge within 48 hours, arguing passionately for an emergency stay on the HOA fines. The judge, an ardent patriot himself, listened intently before ruling in Mike's favor. "The display of the American flag is a fundamental expression of free speech," the judge declared. "I'm issuing a temporary restraining order against the HOA, effective immediately. No fines are to be collected until this matter is settled." A cheer went up from the small crowd that had gathered in the courtroom. Karen sat with her lawyers, her face twisted in fury. As Mike left the courthouse, he was greeted by a throng of reporters. Word had quickly spread about the standoff between the patriotic homeowner and the power-hungry HOA president. "Mr. Emerson, how does it feel to have won the first round against your neighbor?" one reporter asked, shoving a microphone in his face. Mike paused, a grim smile spreading across his face. "This isn't about me. It's about defending the rights and freedoms that our flag represents. Karen may have thought she could bully me, but she picked the wrong guy to mess with." The reporters peppered him with more questions, but Mike politely excused himself. As he made his way home, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. He knew Karen wouldn't give up that easily. Sure enough, when he got back to his neighborhood, he found Karen standing on his doorstep, her expression murderous. "This isn't over, Mike," she spat. "I'll make sure you regret the day you ever put up that flag." Mike straightened his shoulders, staring her down. "Bring it on, Karen. I'm ready for you." With that, he turned and went inside, closing the door firmly behind him. He had drawn a line in the sand, and he wasn't about to back down. Over the next few weeks, the battle between Mike and Karen escalated. While the temporary restraining order protected Mike from the HOA fines, Karen was relentless in her efforts to undermine him. She started by filing a series of petty complaints with the city, everything from noise violations to alleged zoning infractions. Mike's mailbox was soon overflowing with citations and summons, each one requiring time and money to address. "She's trying to bury me in red tape," Mike told Jessica during one of their strategy sessions. "I can't keep up with all these bogus complaints." Jessica frowned. "I'll look into filing a harassment suit, but that could take months. In the meantime, we need to focus on the main event, the federal case against the HOA." Mike nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I'm not backing down, Jessica. This is about more than just my flag. It's about standing up to bullies like Karen who think they can trample on our rights." Jessica gave him a reassuring smile. "I know, Mike. And we're going to win this thing. I promise." True to her word, Jessica was a force to be reckoned with in the courtroom. She methodically dismantled the HOA's arguments, citing precedents and legal principles that clearly protected Mike's right to display the American flag. Meanwhile, Karen and her team seemed increasingly frazzled and desperate. They tried to introduce new evidence and motions at the last minute, only to have them swiftly dismissed by the judge. As the final hearing approached, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Mike sat in the front row, his eyes fixed on the proceedings. This was it, the moment that would determine the fate of his flag and the principles he held dear. When the gavel finally came down, signaling the judge's ruling, Mike held his breath. He couldn't believe his ears when he heard the words that followed. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Michael Emerson. The Homeowners Association is hereby permanently enjoined from enforcing any fines or restrictions related to the display of the American flag on Mr. Emerson's property. A cheer went up from the spectators, but Mike simply sat there, stunned. He had won. Against all odds, he had prevailed. As he walked out of the courthouse, a sense of triumph washed over him. Karen was nowhere to be seen, but he knew this was far from over. She would be back, and he would be ready. In the weeks following the court victory, Mike basked in the glow of his hard-won triumph. The local media had hailed him as a hero, and he received countless messages of support from strangers across the country. Even his neighbors, who had once been cowed by Karen's bullying tactics, now greeted him with newfound respect. But Karen was not about to let this go. She had been publicly humiliated, and her thirst for revenge was palpable. Mike knew it was only a matter of time before she struck back. Sure enough, one morning he opened his front door to find a stack of papers on his doorstep, a thick legal filing from Karen's lawyers. As he scanned the documents, his heart sank. She was suing him for emotional distress and property value depreciation to the tune of $250,000. Unbelievable, Mike muttered, clenching his fists. He immediately called Jessica, who was equally outraged. "This is a blatant act of retaliation," she fumed. "We'll file a countersuit for malicious prosecution and abuse of process. Karen's not going to get away with this." True to her word, Jessica filed a searing response, accusing Karen of using the legal system to harass and intimidate Mike. She also demanded that the court impose sanctions on Karen and her lawyers for their frivolous and vexatious litigation. The battle lines were drawn, and the gloves were off. Mike braced himself for an all-out war in the courtroom. Meanwhile, the harassment from Karen continued unabated. She started spreading rumors about Mike in the neighborhood, painting him as an unstable and dangerous fanatic. Suddenly, Some of his once friendly neighbors began to eye him with suspicion, and a few even crossed the street to avoid him. One day, as Mike was mowing his lawn, he heard a commotion coming from the street. To his horror, he saw Karen leading a small group of protesters, all of them waving signs denouncing him as un-American. "Take down that flag, you traitor," one of the protesters shouted, shaking his fist. Mike's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the scene unfold. He knew he had to do something, but he also didn't want to escalate the situation. Suddenly, an idea struck him. He marched over to the group, his face set with determination. "If you have a problem with my flag, take it up with the courts," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But don't you dare try to intimidate me in my own neighborhood." The protesters fell silent, stunned by his composure. Mike turned and walked back to his house, his head held high. He knew that the battle had just begun, but he was ready to fight. As the legal battle with Karen escalated, Mike found himself under constant stress. The emotional toll of the ordeal was wearing him down, and even his staunchest supporters were starting to worry about his well-being. One day, as he was walking home from the store, he noticed a familiar car parked at the end of his street. It was Karen, and she was standing by the curb, a twisted smile on her face. Mike quickened his pace, but before he could reach his front door, Karen stepped out from behind a bush, blocking his path. Well, if it isn't the big patriot himself," she sneered. "How does it feel to be the most hated man in the neighborhood?" Mike clenched his jaw, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. "What do you want, Karen?" "I want you to take down that flag and leave this community," she spat. "You're a cancer, and I'm going to make sure you're cut out for good." Mike's eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat?" Karen let out a harsh laugh. "Take it however you want, Mike. But I promise you, I'm just getting started." With that, she turned and sauntered back to her car, leaving Mike standing there, his heart pounding in his chest. Shaken, Mike rushed inside and immediately called Jessica. He recounted the encounter, his voice trembling with anger and fear. "This has gone too far, Jessica," he said. "I don't feel safe in my own home anymore." Jessica's brow furrowed with concern. "I understand, Mike. This is escalating in a way I didn't anticipate. We need to take action to protect you and your family." She paused, then continued, "I'm going to file for a restraining order against Karen, and I'll also request increased police patrols in your neighborhood. In the meantime, I strongly advise you to be vigilant and avoid confronting her directly." Mike nodded, his mind racing. He had never imagined that standing up for his principles would lead to such a personal and frightening backlash. But he refused to back down. As the days passed, the police presence in his neighborhood increased, and Karen's harassment seemed to subside. However, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that she was biding her time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. He knew that the ultimate victory would come in the courtroom, but the emotional toll of the battle was starting to wear him down. He couldn't help but wonder how much more he would have to endure before justice was finally served. As the legal battle between Mike and Karen dragged on, the strain began to take a toll on both of them. Karen, fueled by her obsession with taking down Mike's flag, had become increasingly unhinged, while Mike found himself constantly on edge, always on the lookout for her next move. One night, as Mike was settling in for bed, he heard a loud crash from the front of his house. Jumping up, he raced to the window and peered outside, his heart pounding in his chest. To his horror, he saw Karen standing in his front yard, a baseball bat in her hand and the shattered remains of his beloved flag at her feet. "You brought this on yourself, Mike," she screamed, her eyes wild with fury. "Now take that flag down, or I'll make sure you never see another day." Mike stared at the scene, paralyzed with shock and disbelief. How could someone he had once considered a neighbor stoop to such a vile act of vandalism and violence? Snapping out of his daze, he quickly called the police, his voice shaking with rage. Within minutes, The sirens were blaring, and Karen was being hauled away, still screaming obscenities. As the officers took her into custody, Mike surveyed the damage to his property, his heart sinking. The flag that had been such a source of pride and patriotism now lay in tatters, a victim of Karen's unhinged vendetta. In the aftermath of the incident, Mike's lawyers wasted no time in filing additional charges against Karen, including felony vandalism and criminal trespassing. They also requested that the court impose stricter bail conditions, arguing that she posed a clear and present danger to Mike and his family. The judge, shocked by the brazenness of Karen's actions, agreed, ordering her to be held without bail until her trial. Mike breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that he and his loved ones were finally safe from her wrath. But even as the legal proceedings continued, the emotional toll of the ordeal was becoming increasingly apparent. Mike found himself plagued by nightmares, jumping at every sound, and struggling to concentrate on his daily life. Jessica, concerned for her client's well-being, urged him to seek counseling, reminding him that his mental health was just as important as winning the case. "You've been through a traumatic experience, Mike," she said gently. "It's okay to ask for help. You can't fight this battle alone." Mike nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. He knew that he needed to take care of himself if he was going to have the strength to see this through to the end. With a renewed sense of determination, he vowed to do whatever it took to reclaim his sense of safety and security, and to emerge victorious in his fight against Karen's relentless campaign of harassment. As Karen's trial date approached, the entire community was buzzing with anticipation. The story of the patriotic homeowner, standing up to a power-hungry HOA president, had captured the nation's attention, and the courtroom was packed with reporters and spectators eager to witness the outcome. Mike, accompanied by his steadfast lawyer Jessica, sat in the front row, his eyes fixed on the proceedings. He had come so far, enduring harassment, threats, and even the destruction of his beloved flag, and he was determined to see this through to the end. Karen, on the other hand, appeared uncharacteristically subdued. Gone was the arrogant, defiant woman who had once confronted Mike on his own doorstep. In her place sat a nervous, fidgeting defendant, her once confident demeanor shaken by the weight of the charges against her. As the trial got underway, the prosecution laid out a damning case, presenting evidence of Karen's escalating campaign of harassment and the vandalism that had culminated in the destruction of Mike's flag. Witness after witness testified to the fear and destruction she had caused in the once peaceful neighborhood. Karen's lawyers, clearly struggling to mount a coherent defense, tried to argue that she had acted out of a sincere belief that the flag was a nuisance and a threat to property values. But the judge, a no-nonsense veteran of the Vietnam War, wasn't buying it. "This is not about property values or neighborhood aesthetics," the judge thundered. "This is about the fundamental right of a citizen to express their patriotism on their own land." The defendant's actions were a clear and deliberate attempt to infringe on those rights. As the judge's words reverberated through the courtroom, Karen's face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. Mike, meanwhile, sat up a little straighter, a glimmer of triumph in his eyes. When the verdict was finally delivered, the room erupted in cheers. Karen was found guilty on all charges, including felony vandalism and criminal trespassing. The judge sentenced her to 2 years in prison, as well as a hefty fine to cover the cost of replacing Mike's flag and repairing the damage to his property. As Karen was led away in handcuffs, Mike couldn't help but feel a sense of relief and satisfaction. The ordeal was finally over, and justice had been served. He had stood up for his principles, and in the end, he had emerged victorious. As he walked out of the courthouse, surrounded by a throng of well-wishers, Mike knew that this wasn't just a personal triumph. It was a victory for every American who cherished the freedom to express their patriotism without fear of reprisal. And that, to him, was the greatest reward of all. In the aftermath of Karen's trial and conviction, the community rallied around Mike, showering him with praise and support. Local businesses organized a fundraiser to help offset the legal costs he had incurred, and the neighborhood threw a grand celebration in honor of his victory. As Mike stood in the midst of the festivities, surrounded by his grateful neighbors, he couldn't help but feel a sense of profound gratitude and pride. This fight had never been about him or his flag. It was about defending the principles that made America great, the values of liberty and justice that so many had fought and died to protect. "This isn't just my win," he told the crowd, his voice carrying over the cheers and applause. "It's a win for all of us, for every American who believes in the freedom to express their patriotism without fear of reprisal." The crowd erupted in thunderous applause, and Mike felt a lump rise in his throat. He had never sought the spotlight, never wanted to be a hero. But in standing up to Karen's relentless campaign of harassment and intimidation, he had become just that, a symbol of the indomitable American spirit. As the celebration wound down and the last of the guests departed, Mike stood alone on his front porch, gazing up at the stars and stripes that once again proudly flew over his home. He felt a sense of peace and contentment that he hadn't experienced in months, a deep-seated conviction that he had done the right thing, no matter the cost. In the distance, he could see Karen's former house, its windows dark, and the "for sale" sign in the yard, a mute testament to the consequences of her actions. She had lost everything: her power, her influence, and her freedom, all because she had underestimated the strength and resolve of one man who refused to back down. Mike let out a deep breath, then turned and headed inside, ready to embrace the next chapter of his life. The battle might be over, but the fight for freedom would never end. And he would always be ready to answer the call, no matter the challenge that lay ahead.